On Some of the Old Actors by Charles Lamb. London Magazine, Feb. 1822. Of all the actors who flourished in my time, a melancholy phrase if taken aright, reader, Bensley had most of the swell of soul, was greatest in the delivery of heroic conceptions, the emotions consequent upon the presentment of a great idea to the fancy. He had the true poetical enthusiasm, the rarest faculty among players. None that I remember possessed even a portion of that fine madness, which he threw out in Hotspur's famous rant about glory, or the transports of the Venetian incendiary at the vision of the fired city. One, his voice had the dissonance, and at times the inspiriting effect of the trumpet. His gait was uncouth and stiff, but no way embarrassed by affectation, and the thoroughbred gentleman was uppermost in every movement. He seized the moment of passion with the greatest truth, like a faithful clock never striking before the time, never anticipating or leading you to anticipate. He was totally destitute of trick and artifice. He seemed come upon the stage to do the poet's message simply, and he did it with as genuine fidelity as the nuncios in Homer deliver the errands of the gods. He let the passion or the sentiment do its own work without prop or bolstering. He would have scorned to mountebank it, and betrayed none of that cleverness which is the bane of serious acting. For this reason, his ego was the only endurable one which I remember to have seen. No spectator from his action could divine more of his artifice than Othello was supposed to do. His confessions in soliloquy alone put you in possession of the mystery. There were no by intimations to make the audience fancy their own discernment so much greater than that of the Moor, who commonly stands like a great helpless mark set up for mine ancient, and a quantity of barren spectators to shoot their bolts at. The ego of Bensley did not go to work so grossly. There was a triumphant tone about the character, natural to a general consciousness of power, but none of that petty vanity which chuckles and cannot contain itself upon any little successful stroke of its knavery, which is common with your small villains and green probationers in mischief. It did not clap or crow before its time. It was not a man setting his wits at a child, and winking all the while at other children who are mightily pleased at being let into the secret, but a consummate villain entrapping a noble nature into toils, against which no discernment was available, where the manner was as fathomless as the purpose seemed dark, and without motive. The part of Malvolio in the Twelfth Night was performed by Bensley, with a richness and a dignity of which, to judge from some recent castings of that character, the very tradition must be worn out from the stage. No manager in those days would have dreamed of giving it to Mr. Baddeley or Mr. Parsons. When Bensley was occasionally absent from the theater, John Kemble thought it no derogation to succeed to the part. Malvolio is not essentially ludicrous. He becomes comic but by accident. He is cold, austere, repelling, but dignified, consistent, and for what appears, rather of an overstretched morality. Maria describes him as a sort of Puritan, and he might have worn his gold chain with honor in one of our old Roundhead families, in the service of a Lambert or a Lady Fairfax. But his morality and his manners are misplaced in Illyria. He is opposed to the proper levities of the piece and falls in the unequal contest. Still his pride or his gravity, call it which you will, is inherent and native to the man, not mock or affected, which latter only are the fit objects to excite laughter. His quality is at the best unlovely, but neither buffoon nor contemptible. His bearing is lofty, a little above his station, but probably not much above his deserts. We see no reason why he should not have been brave, honorable, accomplished. His careless committal of the ring to the ground, which he was commissioned to restore to Cesario, bespeaks a generosity of birth and feeling. His dialect on all occasions is that of a gentleman and a man of education. We must not confound him with the eternal low steward of comedy. He is master of the household to a great princess, a dignity probably conferred upon him for other respects than age or length of service. 3 Olivia, at the first indication of his supposed madness, declares that she would not have him miscarry for half of her dowry. Does this look as if the character was meant to appear little or insignificant? Once, indeed, she accuses him to his face. Of what? Of being sick of self-love, but with a gentleness and considerateness which could not have been, if she had not thought that this particular infirmity shaded some virtues. His rebuke to the knight, and his sottish revelers, is sensible and spirited. And when we take into consideration the unprotected condition of his mistress, and the strict regard with which her state of real or dissembled mourning would draw the eyes of the world upon her house affairs, Malvolio might feel the honor of the family in some sort in his keeping, as it appears not that Olivia had any more brothers or kinsmen to look to it, for Sir Toby had dropped all such nice respects at the buttery hatch. That Malvolio was meant to be represented as possessing some estimable qualities, the expression of the Duke in his anxiety to have him reconciled, almost infers, pursue him and entreat him to a peace. Even in his abused state of chains and darkness, a sort of greatness seems never to desert him. He argues highly and well with the supposed Sir for, and philosophizes gallantly upon his straw. There must have been some shadow of worth about the man. He must have been something more than a mere vapor, a thing of straw or jack in office, before Fabian and Maria could have ventured sending him upon a courting errand to Olivia. There was some consonancy, as he would say, in the undertaking, or the jest would have been too bold even for that house of misrule. There was example for it, said Malvolio. The lady of the Strachey married the yeoman of the wardrobe. Possibly, too, he might remember, for it must have happened about his time, an instance of a Duchess of Malfi, a countrywoman of Olivia's, and her equal at least, descending from her state to court her steward. The misery of them that are born great, they are forced to woo, because none dare woo them. To be sure, the lady was not very tenderly handled for it by her brothers in the sequel, but their vengeance appears to have been whetted rather by her presumption in remarrying at all, when they had meditated the keeping of her fortune in their family, than by her choice of an inferior, of Antonio's noble merits especially, for her husband. And besides, Olivia's brother was just dead. Malvolio was a man of reading, and possibly reflected upon these lines, or something like them in his own country poetry. Ceremony has made many fools. It is as easy way unto a duchess as to a hatted dame, if her love answer. But that by timorous honors, pale respects, idle degrees of fear, men make their ways hard of themselves. 'Tis but fortune, all is fortune. Maria once told me she did affect me, and I have heard herself come thus near that, should she fancy, it should be one of my complexion. If here was no encouragement, the devil is in it. I wish we could get at the private history of all this. Between the Countess herself, serious or dissembling, for one hardly knows how to apprehend this fantastical great lady, and the practices of that delicious little piece of mischief, Maria. The lime twigs laid by Machiavel the waiting maid. The man might well be wrapped into a fool's paradise. Bensley threw over the part an air of Spanish loftiness. He looked, spake, and moved like an old Castilian. He was starch, spruce, opinionated, but his superstructure of pride seemed bottomed upon a sense of worth. There was something in it beyond the coxcomb. It was big and swelling, but you could not be sure that it was hollow. You might wish to see it taken down, but you felt that it was upon an elevation. He was magnificent from the outset, but when the decent sobrieties of the character began to give way, and the poison of self-love in his conceit of the Countess's affection gradually to work, you would have thought that the hero of La Mancha in person stood before you. How he went smiling to himself! With what ineffable carelessness would he twirl his gold chain? What a dream it was! You were infected with the illusion, and did not wish that it should be removed. You had no room for laughter. If an unseasonable reflection of morality obtruded itself, it was a deep sense of the pitiable infirmity of man's nature that can lay him open to such frenzies. But in truth, you rather admired than pitied the lunacy while it lasted. You felt that an hour of such mistake was worth an age with the eyes open. Who would not wish to live but for a day in the conceit of such a lady's love as Olivia? Why, the Duke would have given his principality, but for a quarter of a minute, sleeping or waking, to have been so deluded. The man seemed to tread upon air, to taste manna, to walk with his head in the clouds, to mate Hyperion. Oh, shake not the castles of his pride. Endure yet for a season bright moments of confidence. Stand still, ye watches of the element, that Malvolio may be still in fancy fair Olivia's lord. But fate and retribution say no. I hear the mischievous titter of Maria, the witty taunts of Sir Toby, the still more insupportable triumph of the foolish knight. The counterfeit Sir Topas is unmasked, and thus the whirligig of time, as the true clown hath it, brings in his revenges. I confess that I never saw the catastrophe of this character while Bensley played it without a kind of tragic interest. There was good foolery too. Few now remember Dodd. What an egg-cheek the stage lost in him. Lovegrove, who came nearest to the old actors, revived the character some few seasons ago and made it sufficiently grotesque. But Dodd was it, as it came out of nature's hands. It might be said to remain in puris naturalibus. In expressing slowness of apprehension, this actor surpassed all others. You could see the first dawn of an idea stealing slowly over his countenance, climbing up by little and little with a painful process, till it cleared up at last to the fullness of a twilight conception, its highest meridian. He seemed to keep back his intellect, as some have had the power to retard their pulsation. The balloon takes less time in filling than it took to cover the expansion of his broad, moony face over all its quarters with expression. A glimmer of understanding would appear in a corner of his eye, and for lack of fuel go out again. A part of his forehead would catch a little intelligence, and be a long time in communicating it to the remainder. I am ill at dates, but I think it is now better than 5 and 20 years ago that walking in the gardens of Gray's Inn, they were then far finer than they are now. The accursed Verulam buildings had not encroached upon all the east side of them, cutting out delicate green crankles, and shouldering away one of two of the stately alcoves of the terrace. The survivor stands gaping and relationless as if it remembered its brother. They are still the best gardens of any of the inns of court, my beloved temple not forgotten, have the gravest character, their aspect being altogether reverend and law-breathing. Bacon has left the impress of his foot upon their gravel walks, taking my afternoon solace on a summer day upon the aforesaid terrace. Comely sad personage came towards me, whom from his grave air and deportment I judged to be one of the old benchers of the inn. He had a serious, thoughtful forehead, and seemed to be in meditations of mortality. As I have an instinctive awe of old benchers, I was passing him with that sort of subindicative token of respect, which one is apt to demonstrate towards a venerable stranger, and which rather denotes an inclination to greet him than any positive motion of the body to that effect, a species of humility and will worship, which I observe 9 times out of 10 rather puzzles than pleases the person it is offered to, when the face turning full upon me strangely identified itself with that of Dodd. Upon close inspection I was not mistaken, but could this sad thoughtful countenance be the same vacant face of folly which I had held so often under circumstances of gaiety, which I had never seen without a smile, or recognized but as the usher of mirth, that looked out so formally flat in Foppington, so frothily pert in tattle, so impotently busy in backbite, so blankly divested of all meaning, or resolutely expressive of none, in acres, in fribble, and 1,000 agreeable impertinences? Was this the face, full of thought and carefulness, that had so often divested itself at will of every trace of either to give me diversion, to clear my cloudy face for 2 or 3 hours at least of its furrows? Was this the face, manly, sober, intelligent, which I had so often despised, made mocks at, made merry with? The remembrance of the freedoms which I had taken with it came upon me with a reproach of insult. I could have asked it pardon. I thought it looked upon me with a sense of injury. There is something strange as well as sad in seeing actors, your pleasant fellows particularly, subjected to and suffering the common lot. Their fortunes, their casualties, their deaths, seem to belong to the scene, their actions to be amenable to poetic justice only. We can hardly connect them with more awful responsibilities. The death of this fine actor took place shortly after this meeting. He had quitted the stage some months, and, as I learned afterwards, had been in the habit of resorting daily to these gardens, almost to the day of his decease. In these serious walks probably, he was divesting himself of many scenic and some real vanities, weaning himself from the frivolities of the lesser and the greater theatre, doing gentle penance for a life of no very reprehensible fooleries, taking off by degrees the buffoon mask which he might feel he had worn too long, and rehearsing for a more solemn cast of part. Dying, he put on the weeds of Dominic. 5. The elder Palmer of stage-treading celebrity commonly played Sir Toby in those days, but there is a solidity of wit in the jests of that half-Falstaff which he did not quite fill out. He was as much too showy as Moody, who sometimes took the part, was dry and sottish. In sock or buskin, there was an air of swaggering gentility about Jack Palmer. He was a gentleman with a slight infusion of the footman. His brother Bob, of recenter memory, who was his shadow in everything while he lived, and dwindled into less than a shadow afterwards, was a gentleman with a little stronger infusion of the latter ingredient. That was all. It is amazing how a little of the more or less makes a difference in these things. When you saw Bobby in the Duke's Servant 6, you said, "What a pity such a pretty fellow was only a servant." When you saw Jack figuring in Captain Absolute, you thought you could trace his promotion to some lady of quality who fancied the handsome fellow in his top knot and had bought him a commission. Therefore Jack in Dick Amlet was insuperable. Jack had two voices, both plausible, hypocritical, and insinuating, but his secondary or supplemental voice still more decisively histrionic than his common one. It was reserved for the spectator, and the dramatis person were supposed to know nothing at all about it. The lies of young Wilding, and the sentiments in Joseph Surface, were thus marked out in a sort of italics to the audience. This secret correspondence with the company before the curtain, which is the bane and death of tragedy, has an extremely happy effect in some kinds of comedy, in the more highly artificial comedy of Congreve or of Sheridan especially, where the absolute sense of reality, so indispensable to scenes of interest, is not required or would rather interfere to diminish your pleasure. The fact is, you do not believe in such characters as Surface, the villain of artificial comedy, even while you read or see them. If you did, they would shock and not divert you. When Ben, in Love for Love, returns from sea, the following exquisite dialogue occurs at his first meeting with his father. Sir Sampson, thou hast been many a weary league, Ben, since I saw thee. Ben, I been far enough in that be all well, father, and how do all at home? How does brother Dick and brother Val? Sir Sampson, Dick, body o' me, Dick has been dead these 2 years. I writ you word when you were at Leghorn. Ben, mess that's true, Mary I had forgot. Dick's dead as you say, well and how? I have a many questions to ask you. Here is an instance of insensibility which in real life would be revolting, or rather in real life could not have coexisted with the warm-hearted temperament of the character. But when you read it in the spirit with which such playful selections and specious combinations, rather than strict metaphrases of nature, should be taken, or when you saw Bannister play it, it neither did, nor does wound the moral sense at all. For what is Ben, the pleasant sailor which Bannister gave us, but a piece of a satire, a creation of Congreve's fancy, a dreamy combination of all the accidents of a sailor's character, his contempt of money, his credulity to women, with that necessary estrangement from home which it is just within the verge of credibility to suppose might produce such an hallucination as is here described. We never think the worse of Ben for it, or feel it as a stain upon his character. But when an actor comes, and instead of the delightful phantom, the creature dear to half-belief, which Bannister exhibited, displays before our eyes a downright concretion of a wapping sailor, a jolly warm-hearted Jack Tar, and nothing else, when instead of investing it with a delicious confusedness of the head, and a veering undirected goodness of purpose, he gives to it a downright daylight understanding, and a full consciousness of its actions, thrusting forward the sensibilities of the character with a pretense as if it stood upon nothing else, and was to be judged by them alone. We feel the discord of the thing. The scene is disturbed. A real man has got in among the dramatis person and puts them out. We want the sailor turned out. We feel that his true place is not behind the curtain, but in the first or second gallery. To be resumed occasionally. Footnote 1. How lovelily the Adriatic whore dressed in her flames will shine, devouring flames, such as will burn her to her watery bottom, and hiss in her foundation. Pier in Venice preserved. Footnote 2. Viola. She took the ring from me, I'll none of it. Mal, come sir, you peevishly threw it to her, and her will is, it should be so returned. If it be worth stooping for, there it lies in your eye, if not, be it his that finds it. Footnote 4. Clown. What is the opinion of Pythagoras concerning wildfowl? Mal, that the soul of our grandam might haply inhabit a bird. Clown, what thinkest thou of his opinion? Mal, I think nobly of the soul, and no way approve of his opinion. Footnote 6. High life below stairs.